you. I'm your host, Sarah Stephenson, and this is my co-host, Mike Stephenson.
Hello, everybody.
And today we're doing a film called Excalibur that was done in 1981. So tell us about it, Mike.
Well, this is an American epic medieval fantasy film. That's a good one.
Yes. Well, we
Now-
haven't done fantasy in a while.
Well, no, we do a bit of fantasy here and there, and sometimes we get fantasy comedy, but this is more of a fantasy. Would you say fantasy adventure?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, somewhat. Anyway, now what we have here, this is some movies you get a producer, you get a director, you get a screenwriter, different people, but this one, there's a guy called John Boorman. He produced it, he directed it, he wrote the screenplay along with an assistant or co-writer, Rospo Pallenberg.
Yeah, and about 3 of his children are in this movie, in doing the small roles.
Yeah, a little bit. We'll mention them a little bit later on when we're going through the cast. But yeah, they were. I mean, was it a son and a daughter, or
2 daughters and 1 son.
yeah, not bad. And became the Boorman family project or something, was it?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So who's to say you cannot invite your kids on board of a film project?
Yeah. Now, getting back to the technical details here. Now, I've always said to Sarah that the making of a good movie is a good story, and a good story which has been told and retold over the years or written in a novel. Now, this one was actually based on an old manuscript book, if you will, written in 1485 by Thomas Malory, and it was actually called, the French name was Le Morte d'Arthur, which is translated to The Death of Arthur. Now, the whole title was The Whole Book of King Arthur and His Noble Knights of the Round Table. Now, this book, manuscript, is about 600 years old, or 600 years old. Now, that story and the retelling and the subsequent tales and all spin-offs over the years have lent to a good mythological tale to get their teeth stuck into. And hence, we've got a good film script come out of it.
Exactly so.
What do you
So
think?
who stars in this picture?
I'm not going to go through all the stars, there's too many, because I will mention bits and pieces later on. But what I will say, Nigel Terry plays the main role of King Arthur. But he was about 35 years old, I think, when he made the movie. He played a teenager version of King Arthur right through to the old man. So he handled, I think, the 3 roles, the young man, the middle-aged man, and the old man quite well.
I agree.
Helen Mirren and other people were in there, but I'll mention them later. But to me, the other main star had to be Nicole Williamson. He played Merlin. Now, I don't know about Sarah, but I don't think I can think of anyone better suited to play Merlin in this movie.
Well, I can agree with you with that
there
statement.
was a movie called Merlin with Sam Neill in it. But that was a different style of movie, and I can't think of anyone better than Sam Neill doing it.
It was more focused on Merlin and his ideals and all that.
But here,
an interesting thing is, before they named this movie Excalibur, it was going to be called Merlin or a subject similar to that. But at the time, they were doing a TV show called Merlin, so that would have ruined the copyright thing.
And they might have tried to link them together somehow or other. Would have been complicated.
It would be complicated in the media circus.
But anyway, we'll mention the other people as we go along later on. But I will mention one little jumping off point. This movie was done in Ireland, and they used a lot of Irish cast and whatever, but it was, I wouldn't say some actors early in their careers got a good jumping off point for this movie. Now, I'll give you a list of about half a dozen of them. We had Helen Mirren. That was one of her early roles. We had Patrick Stewart. Now, Patrick Stewart's been around. He's been in quite a few movies. He's in Star Trek movies and whatever, and shows and whatever. Liam Neeson. This is well before he became a Jedi Master. Gabriel Byrne. Now, I've seen Gabriel in several movies. He's a very brilliant actor.
Agreed.
And I don't know how to say it. Is it Ciarán Hinds? I don't know. Ciarán Hinds. All these people, these were early in their careers, and they've gone on to do greater things.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. So everyone needs a chance.
Yeah.
And when a chance comes along, grab it with both hands, folks.
Yeah, another
Yeah.
interesting thing about this movie that is Neil Jordan, I think his name was.
Who's that?
He was assigned to this film project. It's probably one of his first ones he did, where he was assigned as creative associate in this production, meaning this was before he started doing the Company of Wolves, High Spirits, you name it.
Oh, by the way, did Boorman have something to do with... He was offered Lord of the Rings, I think, at one stage. I don't know, but didn't Peter Jackson do Lord of the Rings instead? Yeah, I think so, yeah. I think so, yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah, so...
So there's a lot of interesting people in this one.
Yeah, this is...
both behind the scenes and in the cast.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, although it's still remembered for the fact that John, the director's kids being in it. It's like a family project.
Well, an outing for the kiddies, hey, folks.
Yeah, so should we dive into the movie itself now, Mike?
Well, you can go rub it on and do all your bits because you like talking about all the good
Yes,
bits.
so the first part to this movie, I'll say it in sections. The first part is about King Uther, or King Uther the Awful, as I put him.
Oh, awful Luther.
Well, as you guys have already heard, Uther becomes king, and he gets Excalibur, and he makes a truce with dear old Duke of what's it, Cornwall?
Yeah, Duke of Cornwall, yeah.
Yeah, and while things were all good, and then Cornwall had this fine suggestion of inviting everyone over for a barbecue.
A barbie and party and whatever, and hit the grog.
Hit the grog, hit the
bit of singing, dancing,
and
stuff.
Cornwall came up with the idea that his wife should just do a bit of a sexy dance.
And who was that?
That would have been...
That was Boorman's daughter, was it?
That would have been... Let me think. I'm thinking...
Yeah,
Oh, now I remember. That would be Catherine, who played the director's daughter.
Yeah. Catherine Boorman played Igraine,
Yes.
Duchess of Cornwall.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's a very attractive young lady.
Yeah, so she does a sexy dance, like pole dancing, if you understand what I'm talking about.
Almost pole dancing.
Yeah, and
got me going.
Yeah, and all the men were cheering it on, like if you were at a club or
and
a
they
bar.
were a bit drunk, obviously, and unruly, like knights would be,
Yeah, and of course, Uther blew it all by saying he wants her out loud, if you understand.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really turn out good for him because that causes a siege.
I don't recall siege, but he did lay siege to the castle. But he asked Merlin to give him a bit of a hand, though, didn't he?
Yeah. Merlin was not too pleased about this. He thought Uther was letting infatuation get in the way of his actual purpose.
Yeah, to rule the land. Aha.
Yeah, but instead he's using his ego and his hormones rule him.
Yeah, he's being followed by. I can't say that. He's using his manhood to guide his brain instead of the other way around.
Yeah. So Merlin came up with this plan to give Uther what he wanted and probably what England probably needed later on, in his own sense, if you understand what I'm talking about. So, they had this plan where Uther's men went off to hide out in the woods, and Cornwall follows them later on in the evening, and Merlin transforms the Uther into the Duke of Cornwall.
Yeah, he used his magic to make him look like him.
Yeah, it was...
So he could lay with his wife.
Yes, so while all of this is happening, Cornwall gets to the campsite, and while they were fighting, he gets killed instantly.
Yes, and now this is interesting. Now, this Igraine had a little daughter. Ooh. What was her name again?
Morgan Le Fay.
Morgan Le Fay, that's right, little girl. Cute little girl, but she was mystical. Yeah. And she could see through this enchantment. Yeah. And she knew this man.
Yeah, meaning she had the second sight, if that's the word for it.
So this guy, Uther, who looked like her father for magical charm, she could see through the magical charm and knew it wasn't Daddy.
Yeah.
And she knew Daddy had been killed in battle.
Yes.
A very clever little child.
Yes, smart little kid. It's a little sad watching your own father getting killed in a dream.
And what's his mummy having sex with a stranger?
Yeah.
Aha.
Yeah, right in front of our own eyes.
Well, they did back in those days. They shared the same sort of general areas a lot. So.
Yeah. Yes.
I must admit, I would not have liked to see my mother and father having sex at any time. in my
Well,
life,
I wouldn't
you know.
like it if some stranger come along to do it
Well, yeah,
too.
that's true
That would
too,
just
but,
break
yeah.
my heart
Excuse me, I
watching
got a
that.
cough again. Yeah.
So anyway, probably the next morning, the word gets around that Duke of Cornwall was killed, and Igraine is a little bit stunned that this happened, and she found it confusing that her husband came to her, and
But
now
he wasn't there, but he
he's
was
dead.
dead, so
Like,
very confusing.
the time of death is very confusing.
But
obviously.
Uther, being a kind man, took her in wedlock, didn't he?
No, actually, according to the story,
Did
he married her just after Cornwall's.
I just said that. He took her in wedlock.
Yeah.
That's what I just said.
Oh, sorry, I didn't understand what
He
wedlock
took her
was.
in wedlock. He married her. Do the honourable thing.
Yeah.
But
Anyway,
however,
after say some 9 months, or
she had a baby.
she had the baby, and Ufa came along, checked just to find out if it was his, even though we both know
Well,
it is.
yeah. Well, sort of.
Yes, and he says he promised to be a good father to his son and all that, which I doubt. However, Merlin comes along and says, "Guess what? You just did a dirty deed. After 9 months, my power hoe is very damaged because of what you did."
And I'm taking the baby.
Yes, because a bit of a trade-off.
Yeah, didn't he say your firstborn will be your payment for sleeping with her or something?
Yeah.
A little bit Rumpelstiltskin he starts. Didn't that happen with Rumpelstiltskin?
I feel the same way about.
Yeah.
I feel differently about that because every time I think about King Arthur's story, I think of King Solomon's story. King David's story. King David lay with a woman that was someone else's wife,
Yeah,
and they had a child, and that child was supposedly died, and then years later they had another child, King Solomon, and he became
A really good dude.
a really good king. This
He
is
did.
where I keep going back and forth between Arthur and in King Solomon. I keep thinking they have so many things in common there.
Maybe they ripped off some of the Christian stuff and put in there. Actually, I'll get on that part later on too.
Yeah.
That's relevant to the story.
Yeah, well, you get to hear that a lot in the story, like a lot of Christian bits to the story here and there.
Well, the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
That's
so
it.
anyway,
Hey, Monty Python did a Holy Grail one too, didn't they?
quite yeah.
What if we should do a review on that one later?
Maybe. So anyway, Merlin takes the child. Igraine is devastated that her son was being taken away, and the same could be said for Uther.
Oh, did it say what his name was?
What?
The baby's name?
They never said the baby's name.
No,
I mean,
but didn't he get christened?
no, it didn't.
Didn't Merlin give him a name?
Yeah, Merlin gave him the name, but now the parents ever named the child.
No, but did Merlin call him Arthur? Was it?
Yeah, but not at the time.
No, we called. This is going to be Arthur.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, he didn't tell the parents. Anyway, much later, when Merlin is just traipsing through the woods, Uther comes chasing after him, demanding his son back. Probably for Igraine's sake, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And then he gets attacked by maybe Cornwall's men.
And he gets deaded.
Yes. I imagine after what he did, it's prevented all of the knights in the kingdom refused to follow him.
Because he is a traitor. Because
Yes.
no one can trust him anymore.
Yeah.
Because he was an evil guy who used Merlin's power so he can sleep with some girl and betray a friend.
Yeah, so it would be...
Not
it's,
very good.
Yeah, for political reasons, it would make it hard for anyone to trust someone.
I wouldn't trust him.
Yes.
Would you buy a used car for this man? I wouldn't.
Yes,
No.
so he's like the Donald Trump of that era.
Oh,
maybe.
now. Don't knock Donald at the moment. It could be Donald Trump people listening to this right now, and the CIA and the FBI and everybody could be tuning in, and they could.
Yeah.
But no, you don't
Yeah,
do that.
but
You don't bring politics.
But there is
into
always
these.
a big tyrant in this world that kind of comes into view, and we either ignore him or accept him, and it just turns things pear-shaped, as
Pears,
we
eh?
discussed.
A box of pears. Man,
Yeah,
okay,
so Uther gets killed, and in his last breath, he takes his Excalibur sword and plunges it into a nearby rock.
Gee,
And
that's a good basis of a story, folks. Hey.
yeah, and
Yee.
then Merlin proclaimed in that scene that whoever draws the sword from the stone will become king.
Be rightful king of England be.
And he,
Hey, didn't Bugs Bunny pull it out? I saw it. Bugs Bunny should have been the rightful king of England. I saw it in a cartoon.
yes, so
Okay.
he dubbed, he christened Arthur in that scene, Arthur obviously, and says after that, "You're the one," meaning Arthur is the chosen one to pull the sword when he's ready.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
and he did.
yeah. So, say 20 or 21 years later,
Yeah,
or
20 or something. Yeah,
because
he was
because
an old teenager or young adult.
not
Yeah.
picking on what you just said about him being a 16-year-old or a teenager, but he made me think of he was like 20 or 21.
Well, I don't know how old he's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Because his older stepbrother was going to go for his first joust.
Yeah.
And Arthur was only being a squire there. He hadn't been even trained up.
Yeah.
So one would think it had to be late teens.
Yeah, see,
That's my...
yes,
Yeah.
see, a squire usually he starts off as a bit of a assistant to the knight.
Yeah, does a bit of kitchen handing and helping out here.
It's
and
all
then,
in the
and learns the skills.
Yeah, it's
skill
all in the
levels, yeah.
history books and the myths that explains how this stuff goes. They usually are a bit of a servant to the king.
Yeah, and they work their way up.
Yes.
Actually, I think that Tony Curtis was in something, the Knight of Falworth or something like that. And he did the same thing. He started in the kitchens and worked his way up to a knight.
Yeah, that's how it works.
So
Yeah. So anyway, while they're at a jousting thing, Kay's sword gets stolen.
And that's his stepbrother.
Yes.
No, that's Arthur's stepbrother.
Yeah, and Arthur has to go and find another sword, and he came across the stone, and
Sword's hanging out of it.
and he pulls it out like no big deal.
Yeah, come on, baby.
And he just hands it to Kay, hands it to Kay and says, "Your sword's been stolen, but here's Excalibur," in a calm and harmless way.
And he was a bit simple, didn't know what it meant, you see.
Yeah.
He said, put it back. They put it back, and then somebody else, another knight, tried to come along and pull it out. Couldn't budge it. And he just did it one hand, just took it out.
Yeah.
And everyone said, "You're the new king."
Yeah, and then dear old Merlin comes along and says that you are the son of Uther and Igraine, meaning your adopted father is not your real father.
Hey, a bit like Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, hey?
Yeah, sort of.
Well, he was born and then was taken away and he was fostered off. Yeah. Well, see, his father's evil.
Yes, so all the remaining knights that are standing there hearing about this are devastated that a young squire kid is going to be their king.
But they accept it, except for, wasn't it one of them?
Well, one of them, who was played by Patrick Stewart, declared that if a boy is chosen, then a boy should be king. But everyone of the other knights didn't like the idea of a bastard son to be the king.
Yeah. So anyway, they actually gave.
Sorry to use the term, but that's how they used it in the movie.
In the real term, this is bastard. He was no parentage.
Yes.
But then they had to go to someone's castle was being attacked, and he led them.
Well, before we get to that,
there we go.
Yeah, sorry guys, but so he goes off. At first, Arthur doesn't accept the fact he's going to be king because it's a scary thing. Bear in mind, how would you guys feel about being placed in a place of power?
Today a dishwasher, tomorrow the king. You know.
Yeah, could you imagine that? So he goes to Merlin. Late that night, he's in the camp with Merlin, and he's a little scared because, for gosh knows reasons, like there's a lot of creatures, crawlies, and creepies.
I think it was part of his subconscious mind playing tricks on him.
Yeah, and Merlin explains this is the dragons,
Was Merlin's last
around.
name Munro? Merlin Munro? No.
Very funny.
Oh, sorry.
That's another one of the Bugs Bunny things he's been thinking of. Don't ask me. Yes.
I can't help it, folks. I'm just a sicko.
So Merlin explains that what Arthur sees is the dragon in parts all around them.
Yeah.
Like
it's a bit like the Force in Star Wars.
Yes.
Do-do-do-do.
Yes. So
Do-do.
yeah. So he says the dragon's everywhere. Its roar can be heard in the wind, and its false tongue can strike like lightning. And right in that scene, we see a bolt of lightning hitting a tree branch, hinting that was the dragon's tongue.
Yeah.
Although Merlin explained that there's
Dragons
nothing.
speak with forked tongue.
Yeah, but Merlin explained there's nothing to be fearful. Just relax and not worry about.
And sleep.
And sleep well.
He did.
Yes.
I don't think Arthur slept much that night somehow.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
I think that in this movie, Merlin sort of becomes sort of a bit of a guide and father to
Yeah, he does.
Arthur.
A guide, a surrogate father. Yeah, he was very close to him. Almost
Yeah.
like a stepdad.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a bit. Yeah, fatherly image.
Yeah, and he explains that what they should do next, and somehow, now that they had to go off and help Patrick Stewart, who was he playing in this movie again?
Some guy, a knight probably. Patrick Stewart was, oh crikey, these funny names. King Leo de Grants.
Yeah, so King Leo de Grant was his castle's under siege, so that means that Arthur and the remaining knights to try and help him, obviously.
And Arthur proves he's a good leader.
Yes, he
And he
did.
leads the guys to battle,
Yeah.
and they save Patrick Stewart.
And his daughter, guess what?
And Buglugs.
Is Guinevere.
Had green eyes.
Yes.
Hey, Crosby, Stills, Nash did a song like that.
Yeah, so they were able to. Arthur was able to resolve this by talking to the one of the remaining knights and tell him that to assist become his beloved the knights to work with him. And they said at first he says, "Never on that, swear a faith to a squire." At first,
Hey, but who was this knight? It was Liam Neeson.
yeah.
Yeah, well, Sir
Yes.
Gawain, I think it was.
Yeah,
Sir Gawain.
so-
yeah.
So Arthur says, "You're right. I'm not a knight yet, but you will be honoured to knight me."
So
at first,
he hands his Excalibur, and Merlin's going, "What the hell?" You know?
yeah, and the knight is holding the sword in his hand, and he can feel the
You can feel
power
the
in
power of the force.
it, and then he finally gives in, and he was able to knight Arthur.
He made him a Knigget.
Yes,
A knight, sorry.
yes,
Knigget.
and
Yeah,
he
yeah.
finally resolved his issues and finally agreed that Arthur is definitely destined to be the ruler.
And I thought it was going to be Bugs Bunny.
Yeah.
Okay. Never mind.
Yeah. So things get resolved, and Arthur and Guinevere start developing a little bit of feelings, a little bit.
Feelings, nothing more but feelings.
Oh, shut
Whatever.
up,
Sorry.
you. Yeah. Anyway, so everything's resolved, and at first, Merlin tries to explain that he doesn't want to cause any magic between the couple. He says it in one scene where they're partying. Now look, I swear I won't use this magic again. Never again.
No.
Never.
Never. Actually,
mean-
Nicole Williams, he
Yeah.
really did play a good Merlin. You
Yeah.
would love him. If you haven't seen this movie, you will be amazed at his portrayal.
Yes,
Yeah.
and Arthur asks him, "Who do I think will likely I marry?" And he gets Merlin to see what's going on, and he says Guinevere, and he mentions unheard by Arthur at this point that a beloved friend will betray you.
Now,
Hint, hint.
that carries on to another scene shortly thereafter where he
Yeah.
meets Lancelot.
Of course, Arthur ignores all the warnings as per usual. But then again, would it?
Anyway, the party finishes. Next thing he meets Lancelot
Yeah,
in the woods.
no, like this scene takes place like maybe not many years, because he's already become a knight. He's got an armor to prove it. He's grown a beard, and he probably is a few years older now. I don't know.
And
So
shortly thereafter, the next
so
scene.
he meets Lancelot, and he challenges him to a brief fight, where in the end, Lancelot gets hit by the sword, and Excalibur breaks into two pieces. And
That's right, he broke it.
yeah,
The
and
sword, that which could not be broke,
yeah,
was broke.
and Arthur felt a little bit guilty for doing this, and he throws his sword into the water, and before our very eyes,
The Lady of the Lake.
the Lady of the Lake. See, in this scene,
He fixed it.
yeah, just so you guys know, as I said before, one of his the director's other children is playing this role, and she plays not the girl in the water, but her hands
She's a hand model.
She becomes the Lady of the Lake's hands in the water for those scenes. You know, when she's not working.
Well, yes. A hand comes up. Here, Arthur, carry
Yeah,
this.
so Arthur was able to be forgiven by the Lady of the Lake and for breaking the sword, and promised never to do the nasty
not
again.
Not to misuse the power
Again.
for personal reasons again. Only
Yes.
for his knightly, kingly duties. How's that?
Exactly.
Yeah,
So by this time, Lancelot revives, and he and Arthur resolve, and they become best friends.
really, truly.
And in this scene, they finally finished off a few battles around Great Britain or Great England at the time.
And it's time for
And
Arthur to take a wife.
Yes.
We know who that's going to be,
And
folks.
at this time, Arthur resolves that he's going to build Camelot and build the Round Table and all that special stuff we find out in the story later on. And which is good.
I've got a question. If he built a round table, why didn't he make a round room?
I don't know. Do I have to question Arthur's motives?
Well, the President of the United States has an oval office and has a square desk or an oblong desk. Why? And back in those days, it would have been easy to make an oval room because everything's round like a turret. So you make an oval room or round room and put a round table in it.
Yeah.
There's no corners to hide in when they put the bill around for the dinner.
Yeah, so moving on, I don't know how many weeks later we start the marriage, the wedding thing, but eventually, finally the wedding arrives, and Lancelot is going to escort Guinevere and some of her ladies or ladies' maids
they weren't bad either, folks.
to the wedding. And when they see each other, you see right away Guinevere's eyes start growing
Actually,
aroused by his appearance.
We'll say, Lancelot was eye candy. He was a good-looking fellow.
Yeah, it was done by. He was
Nicholas
played by
Clay, wasn't it?
Nicholas Clay. He was a real hottie back
Yeah,
then.
he was. He was in what that Agatha Christie one.
Yeah, Evil Under the Sun.
Yeah, and he's a couple of things. He got that. What do you say? A European look? I don't know.
He has that
got something about
certain
He has
charms.
something. Yeah, he's just something. He's good looking, but he's got something else in there as well. Yeah, he's got a little bit of a magic in his face and his eyes and stuff. Yeah.
Anyway, he's a lot more handsome. Well, I won't compare men, but I often
He's
thought
better looking than Arthur. Yeah.
Well, I don't like men with beards. Thank you very much. I think
I've got a beard.
I think if I look at it,
I've got a beard. Sorry.
I think that either Guinevere has a fetish for men without beards, or she just likes them just
Hey, maybe you like.
clean shaven.
Hey, maybe you like his sword. That one.
Well, we haven't
He had
got
a nice
to
long one.
Well, we haven't got to that yet
yeah.
either.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, they arrive at the wedding, and everything looks peachy from another person's standard. But and guess who else is at the wedding? None other than Morgan Le Fay.
She's grown up a little bit.
And of course, everyone is aware that she's Arthur's sister, and yama, all that stuff.
Yum. Yeah.
Yes,
Blah, blah, blah,
and
blah, blah,
she's
all the above.
become a practitioner just
Of
like
the black
Merlin.
arts. Not as good as Merlin yet. She's only an apprentice. Hey,
Yes.
Mickey Mouse from the Apprentice to the Wizard. We saw that. The Wizard's Apprentice. Very good. All the brooms came to life and carrying the water and
Yeah,
stuff.
well,
and,
in her case, she's
not the same? Okay.
she's already mastered her seeing the future and stuff like that, and seeing what could be there. She even given Merlin an example of it by saying that there'll be a gold and silver castle, but Merlin is already aware that everyone already knows this already.
Yeah,
that-
can you go give us something else? Come on.
yeah, I think that was the castle was going to be Camelot. that was going to be predicted later on.
A nice round table. That's Monty Python. Yeah.
Yes. So.
We'll do that next week now.
Yeah. So anyway, years. A couple more months go by, and of course the Camelot has been built. Peace reigns over the land. Yeah. Nothing is going on that's really bad.
Everything's great. Yeah, the trees are in bloom. The animals are having a great time, and no one's hungry.
And dear old Lancelot meets Percival.
Yeah, Percival.
Yeah, a young village lad who wants to be a knight.
Yeah, a knight.
And of course, he's not experienced enough, so he has to work in the kitchen like every other.
Yes, you start at the bottom and work your way up. Like everything.
Yes. So anyway, he sort of reminds me a little bit of where Arthur was when he was younger.
Yeah, he was a squire.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was
a bit like a valet to a knight, I suppose. But you learn the hospitality side of things there, and then you learn a few more things, and you gradually work your way up.
Yes.
Yeah.
So anyway, of course, Lancelot refuses to hang out at the round table for gosh no reason. Mostly because it has something to do with Guinevere. And
he has the hots for her, folks.
Yeah, and Morgan Le Fay is aware of all this and feels like this will be her way of manipulating things.
Undermining Arthur's authority.
Yes.
That sounds good, doesn't it?
And really adding a wrench into Merlin's world a little bit, if that's the word for it.
So anyway, she gets into, what's his name?
She talks to
Liam
Neeson's character.
Whatever his name is, Gawain.
Yeah, Gawain.
Sir Gawain, yeah.
And whispered
look at their body language. She got the hots for him, and he got the hots for her. And he accuses the Queen of having the hots and being unfaithful to Arthur or something.
And there was a scene where Arthur asked Merlin, "Is peace that we defeated they defeated evil yet?"
And he says,
and
no.
He even says good and evil. There's always good and evil around.
You never know where it's lurking, though.
Yeah, that's exactly what he's been saying. Yeah, so you can't really defeat evil no matter how hard you try.
Well, you can't have good without evil.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah, you can't have black without white. I mean, the absence of light, the presence of light. You have to have both. They complement each other. How's that?
True. That sounds like a good way of putting it, Mike.
Yeah.
So anyway, while Gawain is accusing dear old Guinevere of developing feelings for Lancelot, Arthur can't really step in
because he's a king.
Because unlike other husbands who were just willing to jump to the conclusion to defend their wife's honour.
See, he's the problem. He's a husband, but he's also the king, and he has to pass judgment. Yeah. So he can't fight for honour because he's a judge. Yeah. So he needs to find a what do you call it? What do you call it? Someone to stand in for him.
A champion for him.
As a champion to battle for the Queen, and no one wanted to do it.
Yeah.
I mean...
Well, actually, he says that Lancelot will be your champion because he's also on trial too. Which means he has to fight for his honour too.
But he wasn't there.
Yeah. But imagine the word got around and Lancelot heard about it from a third or fourth party.
However, didn't Lancelot come there slightly wounded from his own personal battle?
Yeah, he was having a nightmare of sorts, and where his suit of armor comes to life and starts attacking him. I think it does. It's
a bit like Luke Skywalker when he went in that little cave then and had to balance his own evil side.
I think that's what it symbolizes in that in the Emperor Strikes Back.
He stabbed himself with his sword.
Yes, and it was really a deep wound, like down to into the skin.
Yeah, went through his side, just below your kidneys and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next
fleshy stuff.
Yeah. So the next morning, everyone is present for the final battle.
The battle here. No, the thing for the Queen's
honor.
But the point is,
but no one wants
Lancelot everyone's away on Lancelot, and he's not there. And they're getting like, okay.
Yeah, and Arthur looks over to left and right of his knights, and neither one of them want to
and then
step
Percival, the squire, says, "I will do it."
Yeah, and And right away, Arthur knights him on the spot.
Because he has to be a knight, he can't be a squire.
Yes, so he knights him, even though Percival is still a young squire in training, and that doesn't mean he may succeed, or he may not. He may fall on his butt.
He could be sliced and diced by a professional knight too. You know.
Yeah, think about this, guys.
Split down the middle.
Yeah, quite right. So anyway, but finally, Lancelot arrives, and he fights.
He fights a good fight, and he falls over because he's like blood and stuff. And,
and
from the previous battle last night.
And he's about to probably pass into death, but Merlin comes along and.
Did Arthur ask Merlin to heal him?
Yes, he did. And even though Merlin says he's beyond help, he doesn't want to live, or his body doesn't want to live anyway. But of course, I have persuasion from Arthur and grieving Guinevere. He did heal poor
But
Lancelot.
there was something that Arthur didn't know. The part of the healing had something to do with the love that Guinevere had for Lancelot and vice versa.
Yeah.
And it was the healing love between them which made it harder.
Yeah. So when Merlin and Arthur were outside while Lance was healing, Arthur asks, "Will he ever father a son?" And Merlin says, "Yes," directly, a direct yes. And Arthur says, "What? No buts, no ifs?" That really frightens me. That's what he says. And Merlin says, "But a king must be afraid." It's all that stuff.
Yeah, the way he says it though. But the king must be afraid.
Yeah.
You.
Yeah, it's afraid of surprises.
Darth Vader. Damn it.
Yeah. Yeah, soon enough, Lancelot is all better. He's back in court. Percival is in his armour, all shiny and new, looking like he's a shiny new penny amongst them.
Well, he's shiny. And then they decided, didn't they? So, was that when they started looking for the Holy Grail about that?
No, I mean, by this time, after dear old Lancelot leaves early, and Guinevere takes the moment. Probably the next morning or something, she comes to Lancelot and they do the big bet nasty.
Hey, now, wait a minute. Yeah. Now, this is the ring, folks. This is a bit of a technical thing. Lancelot, Nicholas Clay, and this nice lady playing Guinevere, what's her name? Sherry Lungy, whatever. They had to do a naked scene in the middle of winter in Ireland.
Yeah, can you imagine that, guys?
Now, I don't know about you folks, but...
I'd be shivering.
Well, they did it. No, they did it like troopers. I'm going to say, but take one or take 20 bloody three. You would be freezing everything off. The guy's bit you couldn't find for microscope.
Well, luckily we weren't looking down.
Oh, that's true. But the point is, you have goosebumps all over your body as well. How to keep warm in between takes?
I don't know. They may have had maybe
lots of blankets.
The heating lamps from the lights may have kept them warm.
I think they did outside.
And I imagine if the studio may have had a few warm blankets when they didn't shoot, and maybe some warm food, warm drinks to keep them from freezing or hibernating.
They're doing a sex scene. It could have had real sex. They would have warmed up.
Funny. Yeah. So Arthur and Merlin are on top of the castle, and Arthur knows, or they both know that Guinevere has gone off to Lancelot, and Arthur is a little sad that this is happening and feels like that Merlin reminded him years ago this was going to happen and he ignored him.
So Arthur rides off to find them.
Yeah, and before that, he hears that Merlin wants to retire or leave. And Arthur says, Merlin says, "It's time for you to be king on your own. No one helping you." Did he say
something the time of men or something or other?
He says something about it's the time of men, and my magic is no use to this sort of thing anymore.
Yeah. That gets back to the next stage in a minute, but they do a quest for Holy Grail later on. Now, sure, don't say that. Now the point is, the same thing, something similar happened that in Lord of the Rings. Remember, they did the days of the goblins and the elves and everything. And right at the end of the movie, they said, "Well, their time's past now. It's the age of men."
Yeah.
Same sort of thing is happening in this.
Yeah.
It's time to go. It's a time of men. The old gods and their ways are going, and the new gods are coming.
Yeah.
That's where the Holy Grail comes in.
Yeah, so anyway, Arthur is a little sad about this because he's not only losing his mentor and his teacher
And his best friend.
but his best friend.
He's been with him for years and years.
And
years,
he's
years.
been very a loyal friend to up until now. Well, he's still a loyal
What
friend.
is children's parties?
Funny.
He's a magician, you know.
Yeah, so Merlin goes off and he meets up with Morgan Le Fay, saying that he's going to head off down to wherever he had to go to.
The bowels of the earth, whatever. Yeah.
Yes, but Guinevere.
And that was quite funny. He went through the bottom of the castle through a doorway into a cavern. Interesting that. Did he make a doorway?
Maybe it's a wizard. It's
He
it's
can do what
magic.
he likes. Hey, a bit like Harry Potter, the room of the requirement or somebody.
Yeah. So, Morgana follows him to this.
In a sanctum.
In the sanctum,
That's a good word too.
that he says is the lair of the dragon, or
Yes.
the world of the dragon, which kind of shows you past, present, and maybe the bit of the future.
Yeah.
And
Interesting that.
Yeah, and while
Nice set.
yeah, and we do get to see. It's hard to explain how this looks in this set. It looks like you're inside a colourful cave of sorts.
Yeah, a little bit like anyone been in a limestone cavern somewhere? Okay, it's a bit like that, but there's lots of quartz around as well.
Yeah.
It's very nice and bright.
And there is a lot of
very nice.
There's a few snakes around to make it look more sinister.
Well,
and
it's a bit of
creepy.
evil in there
Yeah,
first.
like Adam and Eve sort of stuff. I think of. So in this scene, we see through some of the crystals. There's some crystals in this in the caverns where they showed the future and the past, where we see Igraine and Ufa doing the nasty, and we see Guinevere and Lancelot doing the nasty, and in the between we see a three-dimensional Arthur walking through the scene that's going
to meet Lancelot and Guinevere while they're doing their rumpty bumpty.
Yeah, so all this is in the three-dimensional Arthur. I think that's him in the flesh, but I think it's like this is seeing as this room is a non-existence or not. Well, this is sort of he's heading to it's this magical realm of sorts is actually mystical stuff that's happening all around us.
Yeah, so
sort of thing.
you can channel into it.
Yes.
Channeling's a good word too. I'll write down for future use.
Yeah, anyway, Morgan Le Fay kept saying that she wants to see more and all that
Now,
stuff. And Merlin sees this as an opportunity to vanquish her because she's been causing so much trouble.
She says, call the dragon, speak the words. And
Yeah,
now, I've got
and-
the words written down here, and I'm not going to try to say them, but the literal translation into modern English is something like, serpent's breath, charm of death and life, the omen of making. Doesn't make much sense to me, folks. I'll tell you right now. It doesn't really.
Yeah, so while this is happening, Arthur finally sees the couple lying naked in the woods, and he, in his infinite capacity, takes Excalibur and stabs it right between the two naked bodies.
Into the ground.
Into the ground.
Yeah.
And Merlin starts acting like a dysfunctional robot.
Yeah, because I get the impression, mythologically speaking, that the ground represented
The part of the dragon.
part of the dragon, yeah, and stabbing the ground with the sword affected Merlin a bit because he's connected to the dragon.
Yeah, well,
Something like that. Yeah.
well, I think that it's before, much later before this scene, that we found out that Excalibur is part of the dragon,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah,
another mystical thing too. So this is some way, sort of having, in the logical sense, or not really logical sense, symbolic sense, that it's like a scorpion stinging itself to death in that sense. That's how I see it. Anyway, Morgan Le Fay gets Merlin to say the enchantment charm, but he somehow
She tricks him.
She tricks him and turns him into a block of
Yeah,
crystal.
because while he's saying it, she starts saying the words, and she takes control somehow or other, and seals him into a big block of ice or clear quartz or something or other. Yeah.
Well, she mocks him and says that he was playing trap her, but it backfired. Meaning, all this time at this time, Merlin was trying to trap her to avoid less trouble before poor Arthur. But now she knows the charm of the making. She's going to use it for her evil purposes.
And she does.
Yes. Later that night, she visits Arthur and transforms herself into Guinevere in appearance.
Yeah, a bit like what happened with Uther changed himself into what's-my-call's likeness. Lagrange, his likeness. So yeah.
I mean, not Green. I mean, Cornwall, Duke of Cornwall.
No, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway,
that's right, Cornwall.
Yes. So, they do the nasty, and she announces to Arthur that she's pregnant and that she's his sister.
So a bit of incest in there, folks.
Yeah. Anyway, it comes off in this next scene after 9 months, I imagine. That it looks like this pregnant scene with Morgan Le Fay looks like more like a black mass
almost,
sort of thing.
Demon type, but not
Like,
people in black hanging around, and she has a baby and blah blah blah.
Yeah, and she's dressed in black, or part of her in black.
Well, part of it was open. Yeah,
Yes.
the baby out. Yeah.
Yes, and it does look creepy, including the thunder, lightning, and the creepy stuff.
And anyway, the baby pops out.
Yeah, and Arthur and his remaining knights are at the chapel trying to pray for their salvation, and somehow, I don't know how, maybe it was Morgan Le Fay, Arthur was struck down by a bolt of lightning right into his chest, or something.
Who?
I remember.
You said Morgan Le Fay did.
Yeah, I think it was Morgan Le Fay using her power to strike Arthur down, making him invaluable to do anything.
But if she was having a baby at the time,
yes,
I don't think she would have been concentrating on Arthur as much. But maybe the fact of the birthing might have actually been linked to the whole lot symbolically somehow or other.
Yeah, it just might be.
Yeah,
I mean,
I don't think she would have been conscious of it, but because he was the father of the child, it'll do it, whatever.
Yeah,
maybe. Yeah.
But whatever it was, it was probably going to leave him less mobile.
He was struck by lightning. He wasn't very well off that.
Yeah, and now that he has no Excalibur, makes him less of the man he used to be. Meaning, and this makes the world itself less than it used to be. Yeah. The place becomes like struck by plagues.
Yes, I mean, what happened to the king? The king was losing his life, his life force, and it was affecting the land. The trees weren't bearing fruit, and the animals weren't breeding properly, and there's pestilence and all the other good groovy things you get through them.
Yeah, I didn't mention this before because we were trying to make this as short as possible. In the past,
short.
Later while back in the story, Merlin mentions to Arthur that the land and him will be one.
Yes.
And so the land itself is being sick because Arthur is unwell.
Sick. Yes. And while he's convalescing or not being a true king, the land was suffering. He had to take control again. And then they decide then
yes,
they need a quest.
Yes.
For the Holy Grail.
Yeah, and of course they all ask themselves, how are we going to find it? And Arthur answers,
search the lands.
Yes, and search for signs, things that are not there or can't be seen by just using your eyes. Even just dreams come to mind that might help.
Back of that, eh?
Yeah, so the knights, all of the remaining knights all head off, except for Kay, who stays behind to look after his brother.
His foster brother,
Yeah,
keep an eye on him.
Yeah, so he stays behind and looks after him. Yeah. While the rest of the knights, including Percival, who's now a knight, and he's off with the rest of the remaining knights. So they head off, probably years and years.
A few years, because I mean...
Because it's a long journey, after all.
Yeah, some died on the journey, some got killed off.
Yeah, some of them frozen up. One of the scenes we see one of the knights frozen from frostbite, or not frostbite.
And he's been dead for a while, of course. he wasn't half the man he used to be. You see, some of his flesh was gone. He looked like almost a bit of a skeleton. So
And the other knights were killed by Morgan Le Fay and her offspring.
What's the little name?
Mordred.
Mordred, yeah, Mordred. He was a little cretinous little boy, wasn't he?
Yeah, so this is where I get back to the director of... This is one of his other children in this production.
Oh, yes.
His name is...
what's his name?
let me see. His name was...
Charlie Boorman. Now,
Yes.
little Charlie, I mean, I'm not knocking the kid. He's probably a very nice little boy, but he played a really cretinous role.
Yes.
Really nasty.
I think he's
little,
supposed to be a cretinous role in this
but
movie.
he played really nasty, and he did it well.
No,
he was very believable. I just hope he's not cretinous kid at home, you know.
Yeah, so he fools some of the knights, imagine, in this movie, in this story, that they might find the Grail at his mother's place, but each one of them was either killed or poisoned or just hanged.
Yeah. They tried to enchant him into drinking some wine, was it, something or other?
I don't know.
Have a rest here. You've been on the road for so long looking for the Grail.
Percival was the least the sort of the knights who was able to get away from these guys. In fact, while he was going, he nearly came close to being hanged, and he kind of had a bit of a bit of a dream, or just
Vision?
a vision, I think would be it, where he sees the Grail and a weird voice saying, "What is the secret of the Grail? Whom does it serve?"
I'm gonna find out. You run away.
Percival gets a little scared, and then he
runs
runs
away.
away. And in this scene, I read it in some of the bits of the story, and it did say this scene took place in a Grail castle of sorts. So this could be the castle that we've heard in the book.
There is a real castle there that did some of the filming, a preserved castle. I don't know what it's called. I've got it written in my notes here. Scan or it's in Tipperary.
Yeah,
County,
I just meant that
yeah.
that according to the Arthur legends, that the Grail is in some sort of castle in the Arthur legends.
Sorry, my mistake. Carry on.
Yes, so Percival is feeling less worthy now because he just backed off, and that could have increased more trouble for Arthur and his kingdom. And somehow, magically, Morgan transforms into his adult self in just a few seconds.
I don't transform.
Well,
but it could have been.
Percival is still on in Cornwall's near the castle. So I imagine that she may have transformed him to his to Mordred's adult self.
There's no timeline. There's no 20 years later source. We don't
there's
know.
Nothing. But then again, as I said before, this is a fantasy, which doesn't have to do with
there's no timelines.
So there's no timelines in this
which
one.
is a bit hard.
I mean, there is a bit of timeline between Arthur and
This
his
picture, I
father.
think there was jumps.
Yeah, just a lot of jumps that were hard to swallow.
Yeah,
but I won't pick at them. It's too interesting to pick at this movie.
No, it's a lovely movie.
Yeah, so Mordred comes to Arthur's castle, tells him the bad news that all his knights have been killed,
And I want my rightful
and he
place
wants
as
the
king,
rightful
father.
place as king and to the land, and obviously. But he says he's come back to enforce his this by killing his dad and probably destroying what could be a few of the remaining loyal servants to Arthur. I don't know.
Rude, isn't it?
Yes. So meanwhile, Percival is trying to find the Grail because he can still hear the mystical sounds to it not too far away.
Being drawn to it somehow or other.
Yes. So he then
Use the force, Luke.
and for some reason he runs into dear old Lancelot, who's become a decrepit old man. And
well, not a decrepit old man, but he's become a peasant.
yes, and he blames Arthur and everything that's going wrong with the land, but on the knights, and
of course on his area,
yeah, and he had a few peasants hit Percival, lynch mob him in a way,
and they throw him in the river and stuff.
yeah, and while he was in the river, he tores off the remaining bits of armor that are still attached to his.
So he's running around in his underwear.
No, yeah, and he soon comes to the surface, and we see him near the Grail Castle again. Yes, and
Once
he
again,
finally
folks.
approaches the into the entrance, and of course they get the same question again, where it says, "What is the secret of the Grail? Who does it serve?" And of course he does get the answer. He says, "You, my lord." And then somehow we get a blurry image, and we see a figure in the Grail, the shape of the Grail, and he says, "Who am I?" And he says, "You're my lord and king." And he says, "Have you found the did you found the question that I have? I mean, have you found the answer that I have lost? All that stuff." And he says,
You're one for land or something?
"Yeah, you were one with the land." All that stuff. And
Yeah.
he finally reaches up and finally gets the Grail. And going back to Indiana Jones and Last Crusades, it's not the Grail we all picture. It's more like a fancy cup in this one.
Yeah, it didn't have jewels all over it, though. It just didn't,
No, it just had a gold.
Yeah, just a pretty goblet.
Yeah, so
that?
somehow Percival arrives back at the Camelot Castle and gives the cup to Arthur, and it revives him
Yeah,
instantly.
he has a drink, does he?
Yeah, a brief
Yeah,
drink.
a bit like Indiana Jones' dad did. Yeah.
Yeah, and he gets up and he readies his knights.
He's been sitting there too long, and he put his gear on. He get to go out there and battle again as king.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, they're going down the road, and all the trees were in bloom. That was really quick. Beats fertilizer, folks. Get your king happening. You know?
Yeah, so all the trees. I love the music they play in this scene because it's a. What's the song?
I can't remember what it's called. You hear it all the time. It's
Well, it's actually twice. One in the siege and one in this scene. Oh yeah, and the battle with Mordred, obviously.
Yeah, that one, yeah.
It's a beautiful.
really good.
It's
Yeah,
a
lovely
beautiful
piece.
song.
I don't know
Yeah,
who did
piece
it.
of
I mean,
music.
I must check into that stuff.
And it has been used
Yeah.
a couple of in in concerts or you know.
It's a beautiful piece. It's
yeah,
very
it's a-
dramatic. Yeah.
Yeah, it adds a little bit of a good bit of feeling to this movie.
Anyway.
So Arthur takes a trip to a convent, I think,
Yep.
where Guinevere, who has been living out her remaining days there
Yeah,
after
yeah.
her infatuation with Lancelot.
She went there.
She probably either she was vanquished there or she
not
left
vanquished
or she
there,
some
banished,
people
not
vanished.
banished.
There because of her infatuation or that she decided on her own account to go there.
I think
calm things
she
down.
went into seclusion because she betrayed everybody, and that was her way of going into a life of
Vice.
a life of prayer and stuff, and to
Yeah.
ask for forgiveness, that sort of thing.
Yeah, most likely.
However, the best part is Arthur forgave her.
Yeah.
Isn't that lovely, folks?
Yeah. Well, he and Guinevere. I imagine Guinevere probably still loves Arthur in her own special way.
Yeah. However, the best part is she kept the sword.
Yeah. 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 She kept Excalibur all those years.
She could have
in
sold
his-
it. Yeah.
She could have sold it. She may have could have given it to Morgan Le Fay or gosh knows.
Could have gone to a pawnbroker and sold it for a couple of bucks.
Or
yeah.
maybe she just just left it where she and Lancelot did the dirty deed.
Who said it was dirty?
I don't know.
Could have been clean deed.
Dirty or clean. It was still dirty that she just did it with against her husband. You know.
I know.
And it was wrong to betray
But she
him.
fell in love with the wrong man. It wasn't
Yes.
her fault totally.
So anyway, Guinevere and
Arthur.
they reconcile, and Arthur explained that he was never born to live the privileges of an ordinary man, but living the life of a legend and be the man of legend and memory to other people. So anyway, we again come to Stonehenge, which some sort of
It looks like Stonehenge.
like
yeah.
Stonehenge because
I mean, they weren't in that area, but it looks like Stonehenge.
it looks
Yeah.
like Stonehenge, and they camp at that site, and Arthur goes up to the stones, and and talks to himself or talks to Merlin, saying how much he misses him and how ordinary battle tricks won't work against these guys. And
Merlin comes back to life, sort of in spirit form.
and he appears to Arthur in a dream of sorts, or daydream, and he says, yes, and he says that your love has brought me back to the land of dreams. And Arthur says, are you a dream, Merlin? And he says, a dream to some, a nightmare to others. Sorry. And he just disappears in a well, not a puff of smoke or anything.
Well, he just blinked out.
But I can't help but say that scene because it's so funny and so creepy.
But anyway, irrespective, he invokes the dragon's help.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway, so later that night, Morgan Le Fay and her camp are camped outside, not too far away.
Getting ready for a battle.
Yeah, and
just to siege Arthur's
castle. And Merlin, unknown by anyone because he's either a ghost or a spirit now, goes past the
astral traveling. That's good. Astral traveling.
Yes, and he comes to Morgan Le Fay's tent, and she is thunderstruck that he is here, or in her dream anyway.
And then she wakes up and she realises he's spirit only.
Actually, I think she was still dreaming, to be honest.
No, she woke up.
No, she was still dreaming, to be honest, because you see her much later lying in bed.
Oh, that's right.
And somehow she's saying the magic of the charm again.
That's right.
And
but he's actually taking control of the charm.
Yes, so he tries to make her out that she's forgotten the charm of the making, and so she starts saying it in her sleep, and somehow the dragon's breath starts pouring out of her mouth.
It makes a big fog, and that's the last thing they're going into battle.
Yes. So
but at the same time, I think Merlin tricks her, and she loses her young beauty and becomes an old crone.
Yeah, see, throughout this when she was being pregnant with Morgan Le Fay, Mordred, she retained her beauty using this magic.
The movie could have been made over 1 year. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, well.
Oh, sorry.
So she maintained her good looks while everyone around her aged.
But see, look, she went from a youngish woman to a hideous old crone with pendulous bosoms and wrinkly old skin. Yeah.
Yeah, and her son appears to her and she kills him.
He kills her. Yeah, he kills her. Ooh, yucky. He
he didn't recognise her.
You old bat. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, a bit late.
Anyway, while this fog starts going around the camp, going probably a little further on. And
King Arthur's guys, who were few in number, had the advantage of the fog, and they came in there, and they battled, and they won.
Yeah,
and what was left of them, anyway.
Yeah, and Lancelot makes his final appearance.
He joins in.
Yeah, and he kind of helps his final time. I often think Merlin gave him a dream and tell him, Arthur needs you, so please could you come help him for this last time to redeem yourself.
He did.
Which he does. And
Merlin gets around, doesn't he? That's good when you haven't got a body to worry about.
Well, bear in mind, he's now a dream, so that means that he can appear in people's dreams and be able to convey his message or a system.
They had this big battle.
Yes, so they have this big battle. Each one side gets killed or murdered or die.
Whatever.
And dear old Lancelot dies of his old wound, the one I told you about.
Never healed. The one where he battled himself in the early part. He stabbed himself on the side. Never healed, he said.
Yeah, so he dies of his wounds, and Arthur finally does his final
he's been cut
fights with Mordred, and this scene was very painful to me because in this scene, Mordred takes a spear and spears it right through his father's stomach, and Arthur pulls the spear into his more and more, and takes a sword and stabs it into Mordred, killing him.
He did pull him forward for it, didn't he? Was that another movie as well?
I don't know. I mean, it looks so painful when I look at that scene. Anyway,
that's all painful.
Yeah. So, in the last moments of Arthur's
life,
he asked Percival to take Excalibur and take it to the
A body of water.
to a bottle of water.
A still body of water.
Yes.
Like a lake.
And at first, Percival
And
he doesn't want to do it.
He wanted Percival to throw it in, and Percival didn't want to do it.
Yeah, and he says, Excalibur must not be lost. But Arthur says, one day another king, will come along, and the sword will rise again.
So Percival goes back the second time to find some water, and throws it.
Yeah.
Well, he gets ready to throw it into the lake, and his hand comes up.
Yeah, and as I said before, this lady in the lake is done by the director's daughter again. Another.
Whatever her name is.
Her name is I don't know how to spell it. Telsche. Talise, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, she, as I said before, she grabs the sword and takes it with her into the bottom of the lake.
She held her breath for an awful long time, didn't she?
I think that was sort of graphics. I think.
Okay.
So Percival returns back to Arthur, and he's nowhere to be seen on the ground.
But you see this boat.
Yeah.
Like a Viking, not a Viking boat, but that sort of period sort of boat. Yeah.
And I think, according to the Arthur legend, that there was a scene with a boat, and it hints that Arthur is going off to Avalon, the mystical place where Arthur goes to get healed. Or die, I'm not sure.
I think he snuffed it there,
Yeah, and a lot of people often say that Arthur did return after his wounds got healed up, but I'm not one to say, because we never seen a sequel in Arthur's Legends, do we?
Well, see, Arthur wasn't a real person. It was based on... Now, I won't get archaeological stuff, but basically, King Arthur did not exist, but there was a guy, a Roman general or whatever it was, called Arthurian, who was billeted, stationed in England for a good period of time, and we believe the Arthurian tales came from his involvement in the local area somehow or other, and it became what it was today.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it. I read some interesting stories about that of that particular part of the story.
Yeah.
I mean,
they went to Avalon. I think he was buried in Avalon. I mean, if you look at archaeological things, everything says he was buried at Avalon. Now the actual Avalon, they think it might be Glastonbury Abbey or something like that. I do not know, but that's getting into archaeology, and I don't want to go there for this podcast.
Yeah.
Read up on it yourself if you want to, but I think Glastonbury Abbey was an indication where Avalon might have been.
Yeah. So anyway, that's our thoughts on this movie, and it was pretty. I still think this movie is a good. It was a good storytelling of the Arthur legend. When I think about this movie,
like I keep saying, I'm not knocking screenwriters. Please don't get me wrong, but to me, just about all the older movies I grew up with, most of the good ones were taken from a book or a short story. So someone has created a good book or short story, and someone says, hey, I can make a movie out of this, and then they get a screenwriter to adapt that to a screenplay. Now, the point is that some people say, let's just create something and go straight to a screenplay, and even the screenwriters might be good, but if they're not a very good storyteller, they can actually be doing themselves a disservice by trying to do it. Now, that came into that last Star Wars movie, was it James Cameron, was it?
Yeah.
The guy who wrote the script.
No, J.J. Abrams.
Abrams. Now, Abrams said, I'm not very good at doing endings. He should have got someone to write his ending for him because he couldn't write the ending.
Yeah, well, there were other people working with J.J. Abrams.
He was the main writer, and he couldn't write the ending. That's why, to me, the ending of that was lame. But if you've got a book already written and you've got the beginning, the middle, the end, even if you manipulate it a little bit, you've got everything there to base your screenplay on. True. So you get a good book, a good story, whatever, you've got the makings of it there already. And this case here, this is an old tale that's been spoken about for centuries, And I think we've got this movie and the Merlin movie were done about the same time, and I think they're both splendid movies.
Yeah, so one day we'll do the other Merlin movie,
Merlin,
with Sam Neill in it.
Actually, that takes a bit. That's more about Merlin more so than Arthur, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
It's actually called Merlin.
Yeah. So in this case, they were able to use Merlin's title in the other movie.
And what's one thing too? This movie, when it was first put up to production companies, whatever, it was put up to United Artists. United Artists. They didn't want to touch it. It was too long. They didn't want to do it. Yada yada. And as is, the original movie would have been 3 and something hours long. They took out a lot of scenes and condensed it down and to make it what it is now, which is brilliant. It flows good. There's a lot of continuity there. There's no dead bits in it. It's a good watch.
Yeah, so so the movie's pretty interesting. So I did like the fact that there was some interest that they used a lot of similar stuff I've seen in the actual medieval literature. I mean, illustrations and stuff. I mean,
they captured it well, but they did in Ireland too. They had that old castle that they did something in there, and I don't know what it's called. It was Cahir Castle, I think, in Tipperary.
Cool.
And that is a preserved castle. So that it was a real castle in a good state of repair with good stuff in it, and they actually used it.
And as we have so many castles in this movie. Which one? Which one of these scenes in this movie did they use that castle?
Well, if I'll go my notes, I got a lot of notes here, folks. So that's myself. Say, okay. The only critical battle scenes around a castle in which Arthur is made a knight by Uriens, while kneeling in the moat, was filmed at Cahir Castle in the county of Tipperary.
So that castle.
That was a real castle, but when they went up in the battlements, I find that was a real castle in a good state of repair. Yeah. Now, unlike Monty Python's, they used one castle to be 3 castles and different things, and they rebuilt the inside of it and everything.
Well, luckily they had a small budget to play.
They had very, 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 very small budget. Now, actually, getting on to budgets and everything, this movie had a budget of 11 million. It box office at 35 mil. Don't know what it did in DVDs and syndications and whatever, and going through TV channels or whatever. But it earned its money, and was the major problem there. So it was well received by many people. A lot of people think it was actually followed the true feeling.
Yeah, it did have
of
the same.
The Arthur tales. It didn't put too much other crap into it.
Yeah, it did have the same feel. Just remember, there's more than one Arthur story out there, I imagine, and they're all written in different interpretations or different. I mean, there is even. I will mention that there was mention in the final scene where Arthur was going off to Avalon, that the few women that were on the boat barge with him was Morgan Le Fay, who was on the boat too, which it doesn't explain very much, but it's probably in one of those books, but it doesn't leave much to explain. And there's also a thought that Guinevere may have been her accomplice in manipulating events in Arthur's court. That's my guess in the story.
You get deep into this, don't you?
Well, I did some more reading about the Arthur legends here and there to find out what other things went on behind the scenes of
here's something
Arthur's
behind
council.
the scenes. Costumes. I don't normally go into costumes, but a guy called Bob Ringwood designed the costumes and received BAFTA nominations for his work. Okay. Now Terry English designed the armour and went on to craft the armour for the film Aliens.
Oh yes, I remember. We were talking. I mean, we talked about him when we did our Aliens.
This Terry English guy. Yeah. So these guys. I mean, when you're doing a period movie, you really want to make it look real. Or you're going to do an army type movie, you want the gear.
Oh yeah, that's. I was
especially
just
if it's futuristic, you want to look real. And these guys really, I think they surpassed themselves. Really, honestly.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of another movie that Terry did. Let me think. I'm thinking. Think, Sarah.
The Hurt?
Oh yeah, now I remember. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, where he designs Willie Scott's costumes.
That nice dress and the number, the big production number at the beginning
Yeah,
of it.
so he designed it, and even though that was meant for a dress for a redhead or brunette. Well, it still worked.
I like it. Looked good,
in a sense.
Yeah, worked for me.
Worked for me too.
Anyway, listen, this has been dragging on a bit. We're trying to keep it under an hour. We're over an hour now. So.
Yeah, so I'm sorry again, guys. So
I want to go to bed.
Yeah, so how do you rate this movie, Mike?
Look, these are the type of movies I can get my teeth into.
Me too.
Now, I'd have to say, I don't like giving 10s out a lot. I don't give them very often. This has to be a 9.5 to a 10.
Yeah.
Because the acting's good, it's believable, the scene's good, the costume's good, the storyline's good, the continuity's good. Everything is good in the movie. Mm-hmm. Now, whether you like this style of movie, that's your problem. Mm-hmm. And I'm not being rude, but if you like an action movie, you like an action movie. This has got a mixture of action, fantasy, romance,
and a bit of history too.
And a bit of history. Yeah, well, it's not real history.
I know that, but there is a lot of
it feels like history.
There's a little bit of history. Like there's even a scene where we go through the Camelot and we see all this interesting stuff. Even the first printing press that was made.
Well, they're doing something. Hey, wait, hey, I've got a question. Mm-hmm. They call it Camelot. Mm-hmm. I didn't see any camels there. No? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, but there was the first printing press, and you know the story about how it was made by Gutenberg and all that.
Gutenberg was not English, okay? Now, let's get on with it.
Hey, bear in mind, King Arthur is English.
Gutenberg wasn't English.
Yes, well, King Arthur was.
Yes, but there wouldn't have been a printing press there. The first printing press was actually made by Gutenberg, and I think one of the first books to be made was a King James version of the Bible. How's that?
I did think good, folks. There was even a scene where Merlin bumped into it, and he got annoyed by Percival in the scene.
Well, they could have been doing lithograph, not actually a printing press.
It looks like a lot like the printing press for those days. I did a lot of. I have seen the similar printing press in illustrations. Anyway, I rate this movie. I guess I would probably rate it. I think I probably rate it 10 out of 10. Because of costumes and story and drama and a little of action. It has a bit of everything in this movie. Yeah. You know, everything like drama with Lancelot and Guinevere's infatuation against each other.
Yeah, it had everything. It's the makings of a good movie.
Yeah.
If you want a good watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and action and adventure, a little bit of drama. I already said drama, obviously, but
fantasy, romance,
drama
action,
does come into this movie a lot, and fantasy with Merlin and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting take on a lot of different things that happen in medieval and Dark Age periods. Yeah. I think that the Dark Age period came.
Well, the Dark Age was before a period of Enlightenment where we started to get I think, crikey, is it Dark Ages? I think when the printing press around that period of time where people started to learn more.
Yeah.
And that would have been about the same period.
Well, I think that...
I'm not sure. I'd have to go into
I think the Dark Ages was the day when people... didn't care too much about what goes on.
Well, they weren't told. No one could read.
Yeah, and then
no one had nothing. There's nothing to read.
And then Middle Ages came along, and that became the new span of getting people to start to
and then the Renaissance
take more
came
interest
later on and different things. But had different levels. But the average person back in the Dark Ages was they were born on a farm, lived on the farm, and died on the farm. That was about as far as it went.
True. And there was the plagues and stuff.
Well, forget the plague. That was their life. There was nothing outside it. No one learned to read and write. They didn't have this. Obviously, there was no television, radios, no newspapers, no books. Their life was based on their farm.
Yes.
That was it. And that was no information.
Yes, true.
The Dark Age refers to information more than education, I think.
Yes, so anyway, that's about it for us tonight.
That was a good one.
This was a good podcast episode. I like the the whole fantasy sort of thing going there. I mean, fantasy is pretty interesting to listen to. So hopefully we'll get around to doing our next podcast episode very soon. So
Yep.
I'll talk to you guys later. So,
Yep.
So this is Sarah Stephenson and Mike Stephenson.
Hey guys.
See you around, guys.
Bye.
Bye.